to A Diverse Life with me, Ian Pringle, and my co-host, Richard Shakespeare. Episode number 10, coming right up. Okay, so it's our 10th birthday. Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to us. Richard, how does it feel to be 10 episodes old?
It's gone ever so quickly. I can't really believe that we've gotten to 10 episodes already, and we've had some great speakers as well, so it's been really good.
We've had some great speakers. I'm not going to ask you to name your favourite because I know that we don't want to put anyone's noses out of joint. But I guess sort of looking back over the 10 that we've done, what have you enjoyed about it? What are the things that have stood out for you about those 10?
I think for me, it's been the fact that we've had some really diverse subjects, which obviously is the sort of point of the podcast. But every week we've covered completely different angle, and we've had some really good sort of personal stories, and people have sort of opened up and given us a completely different insight into things that we probably wouldn't have explored otherwise. It's been quite enlightening for me, I think.
It has, and I think it's really nice to sort of take those people with totally different experiences. So we've had people doing interesting projects in places like prisons where you wouldn't really see them. We've had the story last week from Madeleine Black's life, and that kind of experience of sexual violence as a child, and then talking to people about their experience of disability, thinking about Ollie, and then we have the ADHD thing. I mean, that was really interesting, and a lot of people responded to the ADHD. I think that was a surprise for people to hear an adult.
Isn't that one of the most listened to episodes as well?
That's had lots of listens, and I'll tell you who else has had a lot of listens, and that's Carmen Morris, who talked to us about race and equality in leadership and workplace, and that seemed to get a lot of listens, as does her article as well that we did on the programme. So there's loads to leave us to talk about. So it's nice just to come back to me and you today and have a chat and see where we got to. So I've got a bit of a question for you, Richard. So if you think about your childhood experiences growing up, and when I say childhood, I mean literally from year dot to 18 years of age, would you say those things have had a impact on your life now?
I think you can't help but be sort of shaped by the people that you're around and the sort of environment that you're in. I've always been very lucky and had a very close and very supportive family that no matter how ludicrous the things I wanted to achieve, it was always, even when I was a child, if I said I wanted to do something that perhaps because of my sort of physical disability, you might think, well, that's going to be a sort of practical or logistical nightmare. It was never, no, you can't do that. It was always, we'll have to think about how we're going to do it. So we will do it. We'll just sort of think about the sort of mechanics or the logistics of, if you want to go out in the countryside, quite early on, my dad's thought process was that he wasn't going to carry me, and, there wasn't sort of wheelchairs that were suitable. So we'll buy a horse, because if we have a horse, then you can go across the countryside and learn to ride.
Okay.
Which for me also had the added benefit of it's very good for your muscles and your legs and your sort of development as well. So, I mean, that's just sort of one example.
Yeah.
It was never, you can't do something. No. It was always, we need to think about how.
So that sounds like quite a supportive and proactive childhood experiences with your parents. And that makes a bit of sense to me because having known you for a while and worked with you, you're a pretty proactive kind of person. So, you get on and you do things. And there you go. So that's quite a clear link, isn't it? That your childhood experience was like that and your adult life has been influenced by that. Sorry, looking for the right word there. So imagine just for a moment then if your childhood was a little bit different, and let's just say that your dad went to prison when you were 3, and that your mum had issues around alcohol misuse. Maybe you've witnessed some domestic violence at home. Perhaps you spend significant amounts of time on your own at home. How do you think your life would be now if you'd experienced those things?
I think you would potentially, and it's just my sort of thoughts here, but I think potentially you might have problems with sort of trust and bonds and relationships. You know, if you think about that scenario where you're on your own for long periods of time, would that sort of independence or resilience that you'd have to build up, I don't know, would that sort of make you guarded of other people? Or if you were on your own for those long periods of time, particularly during your childhood, I don't know whether you'd always be thinking, are people going to leave? So therefore, I don't want to form close friendships or relationships with people because, you know, if you think of the scenario you've just given where the father goes to prison, the father was there 1 minute and then not the next. So I wonder whether, you know, it would be an interesting one to sort of maybe talk to somebody who's got a bit more experience. Does that sort of impact mean that you do distance yourself from people and have difficulty with relationships and social situations, I wonder?
I think you're probably right. You know, that sounds about right. I'm not sure it's definitive in my experience. And like I say, I'm not an expert on this either, but I know that I've worked with a number of looked after children, so young people that have been through the care system, and obviously their backgrounds range tremendously, but usually someone, unless they've had that incredibly unfortunate experience where both parents have died and they've had to go in care because there's nobody else to look after them, a lot of the time somebody in care is there because for whatever reason, it was deemed that the parents weren't capable of looking after them, and there may have been instances of drug misuse or abuse of some kind or neglect, so children were taken away. And certainly with those children, I see variations on a theme that sometimes is certainly there's a lack of trust around in people that they're not going to be around for them. And unfortunately, sometimes the process of being looked after compacts that experience because they will lose the people that they work with are here one day and gone the next. You know, because somebody works with them, maybe they're a key worker, and then they leave their job and they move on, and they've had that experience a lot. So I think they do have that lack of trust and maybe don't want to integrate or don't feel as confident to integrate. But then sometimes that lack of trust also leads people to throw themselves into relationships without thinking about the consequences. So it might lead to someone being sort of overly familiar all the time as well. And I guess it's just so hugely complicated, isn't it?
I think it's a very complicated area and subject. But I think also it's really interesting when you do see people who have overcome that sort of adversity. So, you know, you'll see, you know, so the Pride of Britain Awards is out at the minute looking for nominations, but you'll see examples of people fundraising or doing things for their local community. And sometimes there's an interesting backstory where their motivation to help disadvantaged children or to, you know, get involved in marginalised groups in society is because of something that's happened to them. So actually, you know, yes, there is that sort of potential for it to be a negative thing, but actually people can also turn it into a very powerful experience and learn from that.
Yeah.
And that can then shape them in that way as well.
And I wonder, I think I'd come back to that. Let's hold on to that thought, because I think that's a really interesting thing. And I'm also thinking about Madeleine again, and you know, that's somebody that has overcome that adversity, and that particularly certainly one very particular incident of abuse and trauma that she experienced, about overcoming that and totally turning her life around and trying to help others through that process. So we've kind of seen that with some of our guests. So there's this thing called an ACE score, right? Sounds good, doesn't it? Getting an ACE score.
It sounds positive, but I sort of know where this is going.
But actually, this acronym, we love an acronym, actually stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So some people may have heard this. It is something that it's been around for a little while, but it's something that I think is becoming more mainstream. People are looking at. And in essence, it's a way of measuring the difficult experiences people have had in childhood. And you can do a test, a sort of quiz, and they ask you various questions around Like I asked you, really, so did you feel humiliated as a child? Did you often feel humiliated? Did you often experience or witness violence? Did you have one of your parents in custody? Did you have one of your parents using drugs? Was one of your parents suffering from mental health conditions? All of those things. So there's a lot of things in there. And then for each one of those, I think you can get a point or a score for that. And from what I've been seeing, then I think if you have a score over 4, and this seems to be different depending on who's doing the test, but 4 to 6, then you are far more likely to develop either behavioural or mental health problems or actually physical health problems in your adult life. So that's the idea behind these score things. But I think there's a bit of me that thinks this is great because it kind of gets people thinking about, you know what? We are our past. Our past has a massive influence on who we are now. So let's just accept that and deal with it. And if we find there are problems in the past, then once we know about it, we can do something about the future. But at the same time, there's a bit of me that goes, duh. Because you've only got to have the bloody conversation I've just had with you, where you've said, well, I had this upbringing and that's led me to be this person. Isn't it pretty bloody obvious? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I also think, I had a look, knowing that we were going to do this show, I had a look into the ACE scores, and there was an online quiz that you could take. Now, at the beginning, it did sort of say, it was almost a disclaimer that said if you go through this and you feel that you need to sort of talk to somebody about your mental health or whatever it might be, then obviously seek external sort of professional advice. And it kind of reminded me of years ago when there was the bird flu outbreak. So the NHS had a quiz that you could do. So it said, do you feel like this? Do you have these symptoms? Have you got a bit of a headache, a bit of a cold, whatever?
You're a bit of a hypochondriac, Richard, aren't you?
So the reason it stands out to me is that I worked in an organisation at the time that had about 2,000 employees, all under one roof with a lot of air conditioning and everything else going on. So they put out a link to every member of staff and said, everybody needs to do this. We need to manage the risk of everybody having this particular condition. And I think at the time, there were 2 confirmed cases in the UK in total. So they rolled it out, and I think they sent home later that afternoon about 30 people, because you almost couldn't help but get to the point where it said, you should go to the doctors, because it would say, do you feel a bit tired this morning? So people would put yes. Do you have a bit of a headache this morning? Yes, I do, yeah. So all of a sudden, we were sort of managing a situation where there'd been 2 cases in the entire country, and yet, based on this sort of self-diagnosis, we suddenly had 30 in one room. I can see that sometimes using sort of online things or self-diagnosis or Googling things, sometimes it can be useful, but I think you have to be very careful about where the information is coming from and how valid is the information.
That's really interesting.
And also, what are you going to do with this information? I remember when I did this particular survey about the bird flu, I sort of said to my manager, it's given me these results. And he immediately said, well, you'll have to go home straight away. Don't talk to anybody. Don't get in anybody's way. Ring the doctors immediately. You won't be able to go to the doctor to pick up this vaccine. And it was this sort of, I almost expected somebody to come out with a chemical suit. But I sort of stood there and said, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. I just answered the questions that it put in front of me. And I think that was when I sort of looked at this subject sort of over the last couple of days, that was kind of one of the things that struck out to me.
Let me tell you something, Richard. Let me tell you something about that, because I think it's a good point. I don't want to move on too far before we lose that point. So one of the interesting things about this, and I agree, I think that when you go through the test, it says, often the things are, did you often experience? So, I'm guessing if you had one experience where you got a beating from your mum or your dad or something like that, that's not often, that's once, isn't it? So you wouldn't tick yes to that question on the one that I looked at. But I did hear some interesting evidence from people kind of saying the same thing as you, but the opposite. that actually people don't like to believe that they had a difficult or challenging upbringing. So sometimes they will say, and depending on the culture. So if you've got a sort of like, I guess, a sort of stiff upper lip, maybe slightly more classically British culture, you might go, "Oh, it was absolutely fine, nothing to worry about," and not necessarily tick the boxes where you had experienced those things, but other people, maybe, I think someone was saying to me that when they'd done some of these tests across America, they had far higher figures than they had across the UK. And those figures didn't seem to fit with the known number of abuse cases or children that go into care in those countries. However, according to the I'm looking at the Parliament website here and looking at some of the publications from there. So they'd had a discussion, a committee looking into this. It says here at least 690,000 children aged between 0 and 5 in England live in a household with an adult that has experienced domestic violence and abuse, substance misuse or mental health issues. So whatever way you put it, there's obviously going to be quite a lot of people that have had some quite difficult backgrounds and experiences. But I think it's an interesting point, and whether those, because wouldn't it be useful? Is it if you answer a question that says, did you often experience violence or sexual abuse? Well, often, is that more than once?
I think you'd almost have to frame it, wouldn't you, and give not a definition, but we would class often as once or twice a month, or 3 or 4 times a year, whatever it is. And I think, again, with any of these kind of diagnostics tools or online sort of forums, it's all about perception, I think, and where you sit within that.
Yeah, definitely. Because the fear for me is that someone sits there, does that quiz, which you can just do online. So it's not like you say, it's not like you're sitting there with a professional and they're asking you through these questions and engaging your physical response to the questions. You're just literally tapping something on an iPad or on a computer, and it might lead you to thinking that, yes, I feel like I had a difficult childhood. I'm not saying I did, but that person might be thinking, I feel like I had a difficult childhood. And then looking at that going, it probably wasn't that bad then because it didn't happen often. And almost burying their own experiences and needs rather than having the opportunity to say, actually this happened, but is it that bad? And if you were sitting with someone and you were able to say, this happened to me, is that okay? Should I put that down? Then you're in a conversation about it, aren't you? So, yeah, I think it comes back to the thing of what you get, like you said, what are we going to do with that information once we've got it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that was, so I looked at the research and bits and pieces, and I thought, well, okay, if I filled it out, and I didn't, but if I filled it out, what do I do when I get to the end and it says you have a score of 5 or 4 or, whatever it is? What does that mean for me? Does it then sort of mean I need to go and talk to somebody? Do I need to go and maybe have some form of counselling? Do I need to share this with my sort of friends or network and say, I've recently done this and it's put me in this particular sort of level? Or what do I do with it? And I think with any kind of interaction or any kind of research like this, that's okay, but you kind of need a thing at the beginning that says the reasons to complete this might be, so you sort of can decide whether it's appropriate for you to fill it out, whether it's something you need to do.
Yeah.
But I think it also then needs to have a set of, when you've completed it, these are the kind of outcomes. You may wish to just do it for your own reference, or if you get a score of 4 and above, for example, these are the people that we would signpost you to, and this would be our recommended course of action. Because I think otherwise it's quite a dangerous thing, because you could have people filling these things out and getting their ACE scores and sort of coming to terms with or realising certain things, but you then need to put the support mechanisms in place so that they can actively do something with that information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me about it is it's quite, and I know you would have had this experience too. So if you're going into an organisation or a business and you're doing some training, so say we were doing some difficult conversations training, some management stuff, and people talk to you about a member of staff who they don't name, but they say, I've got this person and they're like this and they're an absolute nightmare and they always behave in this particular way. And I often think, well, I suppose if you kind of had a sense of that background and their childhood experiences, then maybe you would be able to work with them a bit better. And I mean, it's not a manager's job to be a therapist in any way whatsoever, but something about that prior knowledge, if you know that someone has a particular background and upbringing, maybe they did have a tough time early on in life, then maybe you could understand their behaviour a bit more, and that would help you manage them better.
Although, isn't there another way of looking at that, in a sense of, is it that person is difficult to manage, or is it your own barriers or style of communication or your own experiences that are influencing the way you perceive that person?
I think it's both, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple as that person is difficult to... I mean, I've heard that sort of statement of, oh, we've got this person and it doesn't matter, what sort of training I give them, it doesn't matter what kind of support I give them, they're just negative. They're never happy with anything, they don't want to do anything, they probably don't want to be here. And then for me, I kind of sit there and think, well, okay, that might be the case. You do get those people that no matter what you do, they're negative, they can't see good in anything.
Yeah.
But is it you, and are you reflecting your own experiences and your own sort of almost unconscious bias on that person? So you've made a decision on their character or the way they behave based on what you think you know about them. You've made an assumption. And has that assumption or that perception that you've got of that person allowed you to view them in a negative way? And actually, it's you that's sort of putting that barrier in place. And if you sat down with this person and said, I find, this difficult situation sort of quite tricky. I'm finding it difficult to manage you. How can I manage you better? They might turn around and go, oh, well, I didn't realise there was a problem. Maybe we could do this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a similar kind of thing with these sort of scores, is that actually, how much can we rely on what we see and what we get from a result, so from a quiz or from an online survey?
Yeah.
But are we then, when we're reading the question, is the way that the question is phrased making us in our mind sort of subconsciously, are we answering it before we've understood what we're actually being asked?
Yeah. And I think that can lead to some quite difficult things where people make the wrong assumptions about themselves and others. I do think, though, that something about having this out there still raises the awareness that our background and experience makes a difference to how we are now. So perhaps there just needs to be some other version of this test, which is a kind of, I don't know, ACE light, where it's kind of, it's like, where you're not having, where they're just saying, look, what happened in your life? Was it a bit like this? Was it a bit like that? What did you do? Well, how do you think that might have impacted on your, the way that you deal with relationships and people in the future? And then it asks that exact same question, doesn't it? So if you find somebody that's difficult or obstructive in the workplace, what feelings does it raise in you that are from your past? And then how do you respond in the moment? And I guess if everybody began to be a little bit more insightful about those things, they probably would get better at those communications.
I think it would be interesting as well, though, too, because the ACE score obviously does, for some people, it probably is a very valuable and very helpful tool. It would almost be interesting to sort of speak to somebody who had done it and had done it because they thought they may experience a mental health problem, or there was something in their childhood that prompted them to think, well, maybe I should do this and see where I am on this sort of scoring level, and see whether they actually found it useful and whether it did help them and help them to overcome certain things.
Sounds like you're making a bit of an appeal there, Richard. So
I think I sort of am, indirectly, because I mean, well, you know me quite well. I'm very data-driven. I like to understand all the facts and sort of then make a decision. I won't rush, even if it's to buy a sandwich in the supermarket. I've got to see all the choices, do a bit of analysis,
and then you buy a prawn one anyway.
Yeah, then I buy one I bought last week anyway. But I can't sort of, if somebody phones me up with an amazing deal, they're a great salesperson, they've got an exhibition or something that I could use to promote the business, and if I just spend this amount of money, but they'll need an answer today, I'm the worst person they'll ever get, because what I want is, well, you send me all of the information about what you're offering, I'll read it and then I'll come back to you with my questions, which inevitably, it doesn't really matter what somebody phones me up for, there's a question. If you rang me just for a chat, I'd go, oh, Ian, I've got a question for you. So
Okay.
I kind of would be interested to say to somebody, okay, you went through this ACE score or through this system because you felt it was something you wanted to do or you needed to do. Did it actually help? Because I sort of went and looked at it all and thought, okay, I understand how it works. I can see why you do it. But what I'm not clear on is what the value is or how it's going to help when I get that result. So it would be interesting to speak to somebody who has.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do that because I think we've kind of exhausted our expertise or lack of it in this situation, and getting somebody on the show that's filled in one of these forms would be brilliant. So if you're listening and you have done that, or you know somebody that has, then please put them in touch and they can come on the show and chat to me or Richard about their experiences. Share as much or as little as you want about that experience, but that would really help, particularly Richard, get a handle on what these things are and how effective they are. So I think at that point we're going to leave it there, Richard, unless there's anything else you want to say on that.
No, I think that's probably the end of our 10th show. Can you believe we're in double figures?
10th, so here we go. Number 10 coming at you. Okay, let's stop it there. So it's goodbye from me and it's goodbye from Richard.
Bye-bye.
Diverse Life is a workplace diversity and face-up theatre co-production. Thanks for listening.